whistling and creaking like ghosts in the night. The Neva car slowly glided through the tall grass as Max approached the dark metal gates. He glanced at the couple, asleep and embraced on the back seat, and only smirked. "Stalkers," he muttered, stepping out of the car so quietly as if afraid to disturb the sleeping. The grass clung to his pants like elongated fingers, crunching under his heavy boots. Stretching, he approached the gates and made a lunge for the latch. It trembled as if in a half-sleep, emitting a dull squeak that echoed across the surroundings. The metal chain connecting the gate panels had long been severed, now lazily wound around them just to maintain the semblance of order. Max removed the chain, pulled on the left panel. It slid slowly aside, snagging in the overgrowth as the rusty post supporting it had grown weary. Steeling himself for the task, Max lifted the makeshift grid, made of rebar, and struggled to shift it. The panel obediently moved. He made another effort, breaking and sweeping aside the grass until he ensured the car could pass through. The panel squealed, but couldn't resist his powerful muscles. "Oh yeah," Max exhaled, catching his breath and straightening up. "I'm just a beast." Max's powerful limbs were truly impressive, reminiscent of threatening shadows, and his figure evoked a Viking, tall, with a strong build. He seemed truly majestic. Just grow a beard, braid his hair, and there he was, ready for a battle like a warrior emerged from a saga. The fate of the second door soon succumbed to the same fateful influence, and the path lay open. The grey three-story cube of the old building rose, amidst the overgrown garden, stretching 100 meters ahead. It looked promising. Max impatiently rubbed his hands, shaking off the rust, and climbed into the car. "Hey, Sid and Nancy," he called out to his sleeping friends without ceremony, guiding the Neva car through the gates. "Time to wake up." End of the line. From the back seat came a sleepy rustle and muted groans. "Darn it, my whole leg's asleep. How long have we been driving?" "It's already light out." "About 3 hours, as I said. 7 in the morning. Whole day ahead." "You're darned heap, Max. My foot's dead." "Told you we should have taken a proper car." "Is your powdered automatic considered a proper car?" The driver chuckled. "If we had stopped a few kilometers earlier, you'd see. No way you'd get to a good abandoned place in a family car." The path was plowed like a field. Once we turned off the highway, I was practically driving on the shoulder. Thank goodness it's all fields here. I don't remember anything. Slept through it all. I told you to sleep. What were you up to all night? Cross-stitching, the girl replied with a hoarse, sleepy voice. "Pash, give me some water." Max, with a good-natured grin, turned the car around on the overgrown wasteland, which once was a yard, and stopped by the concrete steps hidden in the grass. "Well, we're here. Let's go explore." One by one, the passengers climbed out of the car. Pavel groaned as he limped across the wasteland, stretching his stiff leg. The girl stood by the open car, wrapping herself in a denim jacket and shivering slightly. The Viking leisurely gathered his long, slightly curly, stiff hair into a ponytail and patted the pockets and pouches of his sturdy pants, checking if everything was in place. "What was here?" the girl asked, surveying the facade. "Pavel didn't tell you." Max turned to her. "Pavel, did you lead the girl into the unknown last night? Hope you didn't promise barbecues or a beach." "I did tell her. Just not everything you rambled on about." "I mentioned the abandoned school, Len. I remember the school. But this is," Lena shrugged. "There's not a single village nearby." "Where did the school come from?" "That's because it's not a school." The tall guy glanced reproachfully at his limping friend. Pavlik, as always, heard half, forgot half. There was something like a boarding school or an orphanage. The residential building was a bit further, but it's been demolished. There's nothing to see there now, I think. We'll check it out later. And here's indeed an educational building, but it's hard to call it a school. Boarding school for whom? Who knows now? Max shrugged. And what does it matter? These ruins are impressive after all. The royal hulks loomed ominously before the newcomers, their windows gaping like dark voids. Once white brick walls had now faded, marred by dark streaks and cracks. The double doors, with broken concrete steps rising from the grass, formed a rectangle of solid rust, tarnished by time. Pavel, whose leg had finally regained feeling, approached the girl from behind, embraced her, and planted a kiss on her neck. Lena smiled hesitantly, her gaze still fixed on the grim building. "Yeah, there's romance here," she said. "I told you, you didn't have to come with us." Emmy and Max are used to exploring abandoned places, especially Max. "But why did you come?" "No, I'm curious too." She shook her light hair, which had become disheveled during the car ride, adding to her charm. "But what are we going to do there?" "So, here's the plan." The tall driver turned to them decisively. "First, we'll scout around. We go in, look around, check out the first floor, maybe the second. If we realize the building is about to collapse on our heads, we get back in the car and drive the heck out. I might be adventurous, but I'm not risking my own or your hides. If everything's okay, we come back to the car, have a snack, grab flashlights and tools, and get serious about this Hulk. We explore the rooms, take some interesting stuff, look for souvenirs to remember this by. Tetanus, for example," Lena joked. "By the way, in case a falling rafter splits my head open unexpectedly." Max started poking the closed flaps of the pockets on his pants. "Remember, keys to the car here, knife here, tourniquet and bandage here, sterile wipes here, flashlight here, documents here, phone here." "Got it." "Yeah," Pavel lied for both of them. "Let's go already." "Yeah, let's go." "Close the door." Up close, the door looked even more unsightly than from a distance. Rust had completely eaten into the metal. Max grabbed the metal handle and pulled. Surprisingly, the door held fast. "Maybe kick it," Pavel suggested. "It opens outward," the Viking said doubtfully, studying the door. "But it's rusty. Maybe I'll tear the hinges or bust the lock." "Let me try." He stepped back slightly, glanced at the obstacle that didn't live up to expectations, and he delivered a powerful kick. Pavel, who had witnessed impressive doors swing open from such a kick before, even squinted. He partly expected his tough friend to simply punch a hole through the rusty metal. The door groaned, slightly tilting inward, and clouds of rust burst from the cracks near the brickwork. But the door held. Max kicked the door with his sore foot and angrily glared at it. "Ouch," he grumbled. "No, this one won't give in. It's only rusty on the outside. But inside, it seems like there's tank armor. We won't get through this." Plan B. "Yeah, as far as I remember, the building is shaped like an H." The Viking traced his finger along the rust, outlining the contours. "The main entrance is here, in the middle of the long stick. There's a sort of lobby here, a corridor leading this way, and in the far short wing, there's a gym with an exit to the street. So, now we'll bypass the main wing on the right and try the gym door." They went around. The tall leader walked ahead, mercilessly trampling on the tough grass and dry stalks of some weeds with his thick-soled boots. The weeds tried to scratch their legs in return, but to no avail. Pavel and Lena followed, their sneakers and jeans easily handling the broken prickly jungles. "Where does he know all this from?" the girl whispered, looking at Max's broad back as he strode ahead. "About the layout and the dormitory. Well, I told you he's a bit crazy about abandoned places. He digs up info wherever he can, looks for interesting stuff. He thoroughly researches everything first, then goes. When we were in college, we used to go together often. Now only occasionally. Either I'm busy with work, or he's off to some really remote places. Don't think he's just like that at first glance. His mind is really sharp. He's like the head of a development department in some company now. The Neva is just 4 trips to places like this. He has another car for the city. Good for him." They hurried after Max, who had somehow gotten quite far ahead. "And if that's close too, then what? Break the windows?" the girl asked. "Sure, mademoiselle," the Viking replied without turning around. "We're not vandals, we're serious researchers. We won't break windows. We'll break one window," Pavel explained with a smile. "We'll choose the one that has nothing to lose and turn it into a door." "But I don't think it will come to that," Max confidently stated. "Why is that?" "We haven't circled the entire building, of course. but neither on the facade nor here. He pointed with his finger to the courtyard. Between the two wings of the building they were currently passing by are there smashed windows. Some vandals have been here, of course. Glass is broken in some places, but there are no holes big enough for a person to crawl through. So, they've been somewhere else. I told you, Pavel chuckled. The door of the gym, located at the end of the short wing, appeared just as rusty and worn out as the front entrance. Max hesitated, studying it, well aware of the deceptive nature of its appearance. Well, theoretically, there's another door in the kitchen at the other end, he remarked significantly, but it's definitely locked. Doors like that are always sealed. All right, let's give it a shot. With a cautious push on the metal bracket serving as a handle, the door responded with a strange squeak, opening a few centimeters before slamming shut with a loud clang. Max looked around thoughtfully. It's a bit tough, but we're making progress. Gripping the bracket with both hands, he pulled with all his might. Muscles bulged on his back and shoulders as the door groaned and began to yield. With each tug, the Viking wrestled with the resisting door until he carved out a gap wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Let's go, he gasped, grappling with the door that, inexplicably, was fighting back with all its might. Inside. Now, follow me. Pavel and Lena hurriedly squeezed into the dimly lit gym, the guy pushing against the door from the inside, and Max slipping through the opening. The door, sensing weakness, promptly shoved away the less formidable opponent and slammed shut with a reverberating clang, echoing under the high-vaulted ceilings, oddly reminiscent of bear traps to the girl. The door frame quivered, a few chunks of plaster dislodged from the wall, scattering into fine dust on the floor. Son of a... the breathless strongman exclaimed. Who the hell came up with putting such a spring on the door? He approached and puzzledly tried to pull the spring with his fingers. It was as futile as trying to pull a crowbar. Well, they took the draft problem seriously, Pavel remarked, rubbing his shoulder. Maybe it lost its flexibility over time. Max shrugged and waved his hand. Funny. Well, then they clearly found another way out, Lena observed. There must be a simpler entrance somewhere. Reasonable, the Viking agreed, but we're not looking for the easy way out. All right, the main thing is we're inside. We'll find a way out. For now, let's explore. The gym stretched up to 2 floors, its tall windows covered from the inside with a metal mesh, once protecting them from ball impacts. Right in front of them stood a floor-mounted bar rack, beneath which were piled brownish, baggy mats. Wooden shields with basketball hoops once hung on the walls at both ends of the gym, but the wood had succumbed to the test of time, and the hoops now lay on the floor, while the shields cracked and tilted. To the left was a wooden door, probably leading to a storage room with equipment. Across the gym, somehow miraculously preserved, hung a volleyball net. Several more mats lay near the windows on the right, with an incomprehensible shaggy heap atop them. Lena gasped and reached out to Pavel. What's this now? She asked apprehensively. Rope, Max, almost catching his breath, replied. Decayed and torn under its own weight. Everything here seems excessively decayed, Pavel mused, embracing the girl. How long, would you say, has everything been abandoned here? About 50 years, maybe more. There wasn't much precise information. Pasha, did you properly inform the girl about the nuances of our travels? She seems really frightened right from the start. Lena turned around, expecting to see pity or even disdain on the stern Viking's face, but he looked at her with concern. Yeah, I know about your paranormal investigations. Lena waved her hand in the air. With haunted houses and all that. Pavlik told me. And the healthy guy raised his eyebrows. Well, I laughed, the girl admitted. But here it feels different. Don't worry, I won't panic. I'm curious as hell myself. And a little scared too. Everything here it's so eerie. Her. Pavel agreed and went to the volleyball net. I wonder, what condition are the balls in? Maybe we'll play volleyball. He flicked the lower rope with his finger, and it immediately snapped. The net trembled, almost audibly sighed, and began to unravel before their eyes, leaving thin strands of dust in the air. A couple of seconds later, the upper rope snapped too. The fragments of the mesh fell to the floor with a rustle, forming a tangle of incomprehensible debris. Pavel stood there, fingers bent, looking at it with bewilderment. "Looks like we won," Max concluded. "Let's move on. By the way, be careful with the floor. Who knows what condition the boards are in. So, here's the entrance to the locker room, and the exit from the hall is at the other end." The door turned out to be at the very end of the hall. This time, it was a regular wooden door, locked with an English lock. Max easily pushed his hand into the lock area, and with a crack, the old wood broke, and the door swung open. Behind it was a small vestibule leading out onto a platform in front of a transverse corridor. On the left was a staircase going up, and on the right, in the corner, another wooden door, double-winged. "Oh, the cafeteria," Pavel confidently declared. "It was almost the same in my school, except we had 2 floors." "Yeah, looks like it," nodded Max. "But this isn't a standard design. There are 3 floors here, and the ceilings are higher than usual." "Well, that's to be expected." He pointed down the corridor. On one side, there were several doors visible in the wall, while the other side led out onto the street through wide windows, as indicated by Max. It was clear that less careful explorers of abandoned buildings had disrupted the order here. Many windows were broken, window sills and ledges were torn, with pieces of brick torn out of them scattered along the corridor. What was the point of all this? He shrugged. "Well, not everyone is sensible. At least it's not messed up here." "It's not over yet," Pavel smirked. "Let's go. Check out the main entrance, then head straight to the car." "What are you looking for here?" "Ghosts," the girl asked almost indifferently as they walked down the corridor, stepping over pieces of broken brick. "It's one of those classic stories," Max responded. "See, the windows are broken, but the doors aren't. It's surprising." "Yes, it's quite a standard story. Various types of students studied here, possibly even some disabled ones, some homeless kids perhaps. Well, the atmosphere was like a boys' camp, with bullying and all. They made some weaker students spend the night in the office, intimidating him to keep quiet and stay put. And in the morning, they found him hanging." "Wow," Lena exclaimed. "Yeah," Maxim agreed, "but most likely, it was just a series of coincidences. Someone fell off the roof. Someone else, while they were investigating the case, opened their veins. Someone from the staff drowned. And then, in general, there were rumors that the ghost of the hanged man settled here and pulled whoever he could towards himself. Scary, but of course, nonsense. However, from time to time, vagrants or adventure seekers were found here, also hanged, like a local version of Aokigahara," Pavel clarified. "Yes, judging by the rumors, something like that," Max replied. "Interesting, though. I've heard about it for a long time, but I couldn't find any details." In front of the main entrance stretched a small platform, likely intended for children to change clothes, with changing rooms on both sides equipped with hooks. To the left of the platform in the corridor stood a table, upon which lay an ancient journal, covered in moldy mildew. Its purpose now unclear. The main entrance consisted of 2 double doors. The inner wooden doors were wide open, one of them torn off its hinge and hanging crookedly against the wall. Old green paint flaked off in large chunks. The outer metal doors were slightly less corroded, with traces of faded orange paint visible on them. They were secured shut with a simple metal latch. It seemed that the caretaker either remained in the building after closing or exited through the kitchen. Maxim attempted to pull the latch shaped like a G to see if it would budge, but it resisted. He pulled harder, struggling with the rusty metal part for a few seconds before giving up. It seems to be stuck under a layer of rust. No way to move it. Or maybe the welding is so tight that it's better not to touch it, reasoned Max. "We could try the kitchen door or the windows," Pavel suggested. "Check this out." Lena, leaving the men to deal with the door, interestedly examined the remnants of the journal on the table, where presumably the guard or watchman once sat. A partially decomposed piece of dark soft paper protruded from the middle. Her partner approached, while Maxim wrestled with the door, unwilling to cause any unnecessary damage. Someone's nest. The girl asked cautiously. Oh, come on, hardly. Most likely, there's something inside. Let's see. Pavel pulled on the edge of the journal, which broke with a crack, making Lena scream in surprise. Well. The guy confidently grasped the edges and carefully shifted the fragile, crumbling mess. Oh, Max, we've hit the jackpot. A golden sphere, remarked the Viking who approached them, brushing dust off his palm. No one will leave disappointed. Well, sphere or not, we're definitely not going to have a dull time. Pavel cheerfully waved his hands with the keys. Maybe we should check out a couple of offices to warm up. Great idea. I'll go left, you go right. Lena, keep an eye on the second floor. The nomad briskly issued instructions, relishing the growing apprehension in the girl's eyes. Of course, it's a joke. We only have one set of keys, and no one will stray from each other for a step. The floor seems to hold up, but who knows? Let's take a look at the second floor anyway. The second floor was as abandoned and dilapidated as the first. Bricks were torn from the window openings, with holes in the glass where dull but sharp fragments glimmered. At the beginning of the corridor, an old bucket stood against the wall, presumably with a mop sticking out of it. They began checking the offices from the left end of the corridor. Maxim skillfully, and without unnecessary movements, tried the keys, eventually one of them yielding with a dry creak. The rooms differed little from each other in one. Lena saw folds in the corner and decided it was likely maps. So, it must be the geography classroom. The room with bookshelves against the back wall, filled with paper dust, could have been a Russian or literature classroom. Neither paper nor wood had withstood the tests of time and temperature fluctuations, crumbling and disintegrating at the touch. Maybe we'll find the physics or chemistry classroom. Reactants, weights, visual aids, Pavel mused. A skeleton in the biology classroom, Max supported. Or someone hanging. Lena accidentally blurted out and flinched. That's unnecessary, the healthy guy remarked without irony. We need to focus on problem solving, not on unnecessary troubles. Sometimes my tongue works faster than my brain. The girl sighed guiltily. We're all like that, Max smiled benignly. In the center of the wing, almost directly above the main entrance, the office looked more preserved, at least from the outside. You might think that being in the office means you're in a safe place, but when you turn your attention to the back wall, it seems to come alive, like a living creature. From the darkness, barrels protrude, and on them are decorative trunks reminiscent of long extinguished trees. Through the surprisingly intact windows, the silhouette of Max's black Neva is visible. Yet, no one present dares to throw a stone at the window or jump from the second floor. Meanwhile, Lena, gathering her courage, moves along the wall towards the next door, while Max searches for the key to the next office. Don't wander off, Max reminds, his gaze fixed on the door. Pavel, standing behind him, keeps an eye on Lena, like a predator. I'm right here, she replies. The next door gives way to a gentle push and opens with a slight creak. Oh, there's something here, Lena exclaims, disappearing inside. Be careful, Pavel warns, managing to hear the girl scream as she rushes out of the office, like a bullet, into his arms. Within moments, Max is by her side, his gaze still fixed on the open door. What's in there? He asks. A skeleton. Lena breathes, pale. In a noose, damn it. We found it. Oh, come on. Viking murmurs skeptically and enters the office. What's in there? Pavel asks a moment later. Go see for yourself. Lena's right, Max confirms. After a glance at his slightly calmer friend, Pavel follows Max. Indeed, in the office hangs a rope from the ceiling, the loop of which encircles the thin neck of a person in her frotted clothing. The skin sags, the bones protrude, the eyes, mouth, and nose are sunken, the head resembling a bear skull, covered with dull hair. Is that him? Pavel asks, puzzled. Yeah, they left him here. In memory. Don't be naive, Posha. It's a recent find. Well, relatively. 3 or 4 years. He's already mummified, Max remarks. Damn. We need to call the police. Yeah, agreed. Max nods regretfully. But it's not our concern anymore. They leave the office, where Lena comes to her senses. Are you okay? Max asks seriously, pulling out his phone from his pocket. I'm fine. I'm fine. Lena waves her hand. Just got scared, unexpectedly. Such a silly prank, sorry. Jokes are inappropriate here. This guy has been hanging here for 3 or 4 years. Pavel comforts her, hugging her. The strong guy fiddles with his phone. What happened? Pasha, try to make a call. There's no network. The guy pulls out his smartphone from his back pocket and tries to make a call. The same thing. Lena. The lack of signal on the phone no longer surprises anyone. Let's get out of here, Max suggests. Either we try outside, or we head to the nearest station. No one will want to hang around with such a companion behind their back, I think. Lena nods. They head downstairs and make their way to the gym, deciding not to take risks and explore unknown areas. Along the way, Lena notices that one of the broken windows is filled with something that has long darkened beyond recognition, causing her a slight unease. The gym is dark and quiet. Max decides not to give the door a chance and crashes into it immediately. But it doesn't give in. He pants and knocks, but the door remains steadfast. Finally, he turns to Pavel with a disappointed look. We'll have to try together. The door wouldn't budge, even with their combined efforts. In the end, it remained in place, only slightly trembling and shedding a couple of pieces of plaster onto the floor. That's it, Maxim exhaled, leaning his palms on his knees. Looks like after that blow, it leaned a bit, or something got stuck on the other side. The kitchen, Pavel suggested, and Maxim nodded in agreement. Without further ado, Maxim knocked down the door to the dining room, and it crumbled as if succumbing to the pressure of time in an abandoned building. Passing through the doorway that separated the dining room and the kitchen, they quickly found a small door leading outside. It was metallic, locked with a massive Soviet-era lock. Almost as a protest, Maxim kicked it with his heavy boot, but there was no hope of success. That's it. My patience is wearing thin. Those bricks from the corridor will come in handy now, he said, exhaling with frustration, and left the dining room. When Lena and Pavel caught up with him, he was already picking up a brick from the floor and heading towards the nearest window. Pavel began, trying to calm the anxious Lena, but at that moment, there was a deafening crash. The brick Maxim angrily threw at the window ricocheted off the shattered glass, narrowly missing Pavel's knee, and hit the floor. The glass shards, darkened by years of dirt, scattered across the floor, but remained intact. For a couple of seconds, they silently stared at the broken window. How did you do that? Pavel foolishly asked. I'll figure it out for a price, Maxim replied and picked up another brick. Let's try again. He stepped aside and threw the brick at the window, but nothing changed. All the windows remained undamaged. No matter how many stones they threw, the result remained the same. Maxim tiredly slumped to the floor, leaning against the wall. Pavel approached him, while Lena remained standing, wrapped in her denim jacket. That's it, Maxim unexpectedly said calmly. We're blocked. The windows won't budge. No communication, no food, no water. Especially worrying is the last one. We need to come up with something. Maybe there are sinks in the kitchen, Lena suggested, barely swallowing the dry lump that had formed in her throat. Pavel looked at her skeptically. After all these years, unlikely that anything's left except rust. For now, we just brainstorm, Pavel said. We're searching for ideas. Nothing's coming to mind. We stumbled upon something strange. Pasha. Got anything? We'll manage, Pavel said with complete confidence. We could try calling from the roof. Lena spoke up again. Maybe someone will hear. Maxim turned to his friend. Where are our wits? We're not cavemen to just throw stones. Time's ticking, Pavel, time's ticking. He leapt and confidently headed towards the staircase. Upon reaching the landing of the 3rd floor, he was met with a metal grate door and a narrow passage leading upwards to a small booth with a door opening onto the roof. Both passages were open, which brought relief, although there were some doubts about the upper one. Nonetheless, Max easily turned it open with his shoulder. They all disregarded the condition of the lock and instantly immersed themselves in their phones. After a few seconds, they all looked at each other and shook their heads. There was no signal. Well, it's still early to panic. Obviously, we haven't checked everything, Max wisely remarked. We think we've missed something. Damn. Fire escape. He began to look around, and the guy and the girl also started searching for the rusty pipes of the fire escape on the flat, dirty roof. They found them quickly. The fire escape used to run along the wall of the long wing, but now only a broken piece of one pipe and the bent piece of another protruded from the roof. Somewhere below, holes in the masonry where the support rods were inserted could be seen, one of which even stuck out at the level of the second floor. There was no fire escape. Damn, Max sighed, ruffling his thick hair and wiping his face. Well, it's okay to panic a little, but cautiously, without overreacting. A muffled sob from Lena came from the booth with the fire escape. Pavel glanced at her. What's up, sweetheart? Come here. No, I'm afraid of heights. I'm already scared here on the roof, and near this door too. I'm just scared, Pasha. What's happening here? She complained, sitting down and hugging herself. What kind of place is this? The guy quickly approached her, sat down next to her, and hugged her. He whispered something reassuring in her ear. Max, running his hands through his hair, walked around the roof. He stopped at the edge above the main entrance, thoughtfully looking down at his car. After a while, Pavel came up behind him. How is it? Max asked without turning around. Fine, holding up. She's strong. Yeah, I noticed. Good. What do you think? There's a concrete overhang above the entrance, minus a couple of meters. Max, are you crazy? What will those couple of meters give us? The guy said, looking down. Besides, surviving is not exactly what we need, right? We need to get out of here whole and unharmed. He suddenly looked sharply at Max. Do you understand me? At least for Lena's sake. I got you, buddy. We'll figure something out. They won't catch us that easily. They descended and stood for a while in the corridor on the third floor, looking at each other. So, what are the conclusions? Max took the initiative again. For some unknown reason, we're stuck in an abandoned building without communication and provisions. We have to admit that some paranormal force is hindering our way out, quite effectively. He turned around, looked around, glanced along the long, dimly lit corridor, and suddenly shouted, making the girl flinch. Hey, who's there? The voice echoed into the distance, penetrated the empty stairwells and corners, and when Max had already turned away from the empty corridor, a clear affirmative echo suddenly returned. Here, the echo calmly replied, slightly shifting the emphasis to the last syllable. Max jerked abruptly and spun towards the echo, as if trying to catch sight of someone. Pavel thought his friend had reacted too sharply, although the self-sufficiency of the local acoustics sent shivers down his spine. He was about to intervene, but Lena beat him to it. Maxim, please, enough. If it responds like that again, I might just wet myself right here. She squeezed out a plaintive joke. Honestly, I'm about to. Where's the toilet? I'm not going there alone. No one's going alone, Max nervously replied, running his palm over his forehead and keeping his eyes fixed on the talkative corridor. And about the toilet, that's just something to consider. He turned to Pavel. The sewage system, he clarified. Well, there must be something here, right? It's probably been dried up for a long time. If I'm not mistaken, it's at the far end of the lower wing, on the first floor. They hurried down to the first floor and walked past the main entrance towards the far end of the corridor. Lena remembered a plastic bottle of water in the glove compartment of the Neva, just a few steps away from them. The thought wasn't alarming yet, but her tongue involuntarily ran over her dry lips. When would they start suffering from thirst seriously? By evening, at night. The thought of spending the night here suddenly loomed large, overshadowing everything else. An abandoned building with an unknown force living inside, keeping them here. A mummified body in one of the rooms. Who knows what else in dozens of others. As Max said, Bodies were found later too, right? How many people died within these walls? How many of them remained? Her lips trembled, and her throat dried up completely. Now the memory of water in the car became agonizing. What if those who came here didn't want to end their lives at all? At first, a voice whispered insidiously in her mind as she hurried after her friends down the corridor. But then, dying of thirst, locked in here with the locals, a picture of a window with sharp shards, covered in something dark, flashed before her eyes. What if later, she walked down the corridor, trying to hold back tears? The toilet was at the end of a short corridor in the end wall. They passed by a wide window facing the facade. The window was dark and cracked. Pavel, on the move, nudged it with his elbow just to be sure and hissed through his teeth. The glass didn't seem to yield. The vestibule corridor ended in a doorway, behind which was a concrete wall. To the right and left were narrow corridors without windows, at the end of which new doorways could be seen. Boys to the left, girls to the right, Max grimly joked, and all three headed left towards the door marked M. The toilet was a typical concrete box. Against the wall opposite the door was a small elevation with 4 round holes spaced evenly along it. Along the wall to the right ran a sloping stone trough, also plunging into a hole beneath the elevation. Looks like the residents had a civilized life, Pavel remarked. Max gave the dark voids an appraising look. I won't fit, he said somewhat guiltily. Pavel won't fit either, and won't go in. Lena grabbed the guy's arm. The big guy glanced at the girl's narrow shoulders. Don't even think about it, Pavel immediately declared. You said not to split up. I won't let her go in there. Oh no, it's just inertia on my part. He waved his hand. Max sighed heavily. Still no chances, he said. Even if there's some kind of pump well, which I doubt, it's probably still covered with a grate or hatch. And considering the type of glass around here, he wearily waved his hand and walked towards the gutter. Does anyone mind if I try? Pavel cautiously asked, pulling his hand out of Lena's hand. After exchanging a glance with her, he followed Max. I'm not going out, warned Lena, turning away. Then they switched roles. Hearing the sound of a zipper being undone behind him, Max uncertainly asked, Maybe I should try. Just go ahead and try, snapped Lena angrily, rustling her jeans. I won't die of shame, but I might very well die of fear. Did we even bring any weapons? Well, I have a knife, said the Viking, patting the sheath on his thigh. And what about you, Pash? And I have Max, the guy replied without a hint of humor. After the restroom, they thoroughly checked all the windows on the first and second floors, but didn't find a single one that could be crawled through without getting cut to shreds. The shards of glass rocked in fragile-looking wooden frames, but sat firmly, like teeth in a shark's mouth. Suspicions about the dark spots on the glass rays below turned into certainty in Lena's mind. Someone was trying to get out, mindlessly shredding their own body on the relentless blades of the dark shards, and she strongly doubted that this someone succeeded. But did this someone really want to get out, or was it just a way? The only consolation was that they hadn't stumbled upon any more bodies. They carefully avoided the room with the hanging corpse. Max assured them that the windows there were intact. In the end, the three of them stood by the window in the office with decorative trees. Twilight was falling. The thirst was growing stronger, but hunger was not bothering them, yet the tension was showing. Neva was dark a few meters below, reminding them that there was something familiar and adequate somewhere in the world. Very close, just not accessible yet. You know what, guys, Lena said a bit hesitantly, looking at the car. Let's lock all the offices, shall we? For the night. If I think that there are plenty of open doors in the corridor, from which something could come out in the darkness, I'll be grey-haired by morning. Max nodded and jingled a bunch of keys, pulling them out of his pocket. You're not alone. Let's go. One by one, they locked the offices, even found the key to the one with the hanged person. It was somewhat reassuring. They gathered again in the office above the Neva, where darkness was already thickening, pushed the pots with trees aside, and sat down against the wall. Lena wearily leaned against Pasha, feeling more numbness than drowsiness. Twilight outside the window quickly turned into impenetrable darkness, and night fell over the abandoned building. "I feel like drinking," the girl said hoarsely. "Let's not talk about it," came Max's hoarse response from the darkness. "It'll only get worse. Max, maybe we should try dismantling the floor tomorrow." "On the first floor." "Well, what if there's a way out from the basement?" "The basement probably doesn't connect to the classrooms." "What are you thinking?" The jock readily changed the subject. "Unless there's a hole from some time. Maybe we could search by smell." "There was hardly any smell even in the restroom," Pavel said soberly. "Even if there was," Lena's voice sounded just as sluggish, but already sleepy. "If there's even a chance we can get out through the floor, you won't break even the rotten board. Not enough glass, right?" The office fell into silence. "Max, you said you have a flashlight, right?" Pavel broke the silence softly. "I do," he agreed. "I won't turn it on unless necessary. Who knows? By the way," he fumbled in his pants, then a moment later banished the darkness with the light from his smartphone. "Now everyone turn off your bricks. They'll kill the battery searching for a signal. And we might still need to make a call. Maybe take a few pictures of the corridor, a couple of offices," Pavel suggested, pulling his phone out of his jeans. "Do we really have to?" Lena hurriedly interjected. "If I see something paranormal there, I'll jump off the roof myself." "One more," grumbled her boyfriend, settling against the wall again and laying his head on her lap. "First, one's gawking at the covers. Now this one's talking about jumping. Put an end to this. Maybe it's the building itself." The girl spoke softly again in the darkness that had fallen once more. "You know how scared I was up there on the roof. You stand at the edge, look down, say something, and I thought, what if you down, and I'm here alone, with these windows and all that there." She shuddered, and Pavel, as best he could, hugged her. "Well, no, that won't happen. I won't leave you alone." Perhaps they had finally drifted off into a tender, uneasy sleep, from which they were rudely jerked by a sound unimaginable in the empty abandoned building in the depths of the night. But the sound was there, and it pulled the tired trio from their already taut nerves like a rasp. The sound of uneven shuffling footsteps came from the corridor to the right, from the very far end of the wing. Awkward, cautious steps, as if someone, dragging their feet, was walking along the corridor in the distance. Then there was silence, in which all three froze in tense poses. Lena pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a scream, yet she barely restrained a stifled groan when a light crash echoed through the corridor. There was no need to guess its source. Someone was shaking the locked door of the farthest office. One, another. After a short pause, the footsteps resumed, slowly approaching. Pause. The noise of a door being rattled in the darkness as someone tried to open it. Steps towards them, as if someone was moving, shuffling their feet, and methodically checking all the doors in the corridor, one by one. "Max," Pavel hissed hoarsely. "Max." In the darkness, it was hard to see what the jock was doing, but he didn't respond, although the rustling indicated he had woken up, just like they had. "Max, the door. Lock it." The guy groaned barely audibly. There was noise and fuss. A flashlight flickered and then dimmed, which Max had placed on the floor with the glass facing down. In the remaining light, it was visible how he shook hands, pull a bunch of keys out of his pants pocket, trying not to make too much noise. The mighty Viking's demeanor was now strikingly different from his usual, almost always composed and confident state. Pure, indescribable terror was evident in his face and movements, his eyes bulging from their sockets, his breath hoarse and uneven. It seemed like he would collapse any moment, and yet it was still the same Max, who always did everything thoughtfully and meticulously. Sitting on his knees in front of the door, he waited for a moment, suppressing the tremor in his hands, then took a deep breath and began to swiftly and silently shuffle through the identical keys, trying to manipulate the lock. The key glided smoothly into the keyhole, pressed, delicately extracted, turned, and slid in without a sound. Another key. The rustle of footsteps, the creak of the door, key in the keyhole, press, extraction, turning, and a new one. The rustle of footsteps, The creak of the door. It felt like a wild, almost frantic competition, a game where something important was at stake. Reason. Life itself. Press, turn, rustle, creak. When the door of the adjacent office began to shake, Lena sank her teeth into the flesh of her palm until it hurt, suppressing a desperate scream. The footsteps slowly approached their door. The offices were positioned opposite each other, separated only by a faded notice board. Max still had about a dozen keys left. Smoothly into the keyhole, press, extraction, turning, a new one. Perhaps each of them was trying not to think about the possibility of missing the right key, because the lock was a bit stiff. The footsteps halted in front of the door. Key in the lock, pressing, turn. As soon as the key smoothly slipped out of the keyhole, the door shook abruptly. Then again, the rotten wood creaked, and for a moment, everyone thought that whoever was on the other side would tear the latch out of the fragile wood and enter. But after a long pause, which seemed like an eternity to everyone, the footsteps resumed. After a while, the door on the left began to tremble. Lena silently cried, biting into her bitten palm, trembling all over, while Pavel hugged her tightly, trying to protect and calm her down. Max knelt before the door, his gaze filled with horror and disbelief, clutching the key that was found when it was almost too late. "What is that?" Pavel whispered, horror reflected in his eyes as he looked at his friend. "What's in there?" He just shook his head. Meanwhile, the footsteps approached the next door and then faded away. Instead of the expected noise, there was only the quiet creak of the opening door, filling everyone with a new sense of dread. It was locked. The guy hissed, hugging his quietly trembling girlfriend. "You locked it." Max nodded uncertainly and suddenly stood up. The footsteps in the corridor rattled again, clearly heading towards the now open office, the one with the gallows. Pavel remembered. The Viking nodded again and confidently pulled out a spring knife from its sheath. The click of the blade, sliding out of the handle, sounded as loud as a gunshot to everyone. "What are you doing?" the guy exclaimed, but Max had already grabbed the knife by the blade and handed it to him handle first. "Here, just in case," he said quietly, but no longer in a whisper, and handed the knife to his friend. "What are you planning?" Pavel asked just as quietly, suddenly feeling a small glimmer of confidence, although it was more about Max returning to his usual self than the knife. "What are we afraid of?" Max asked sharply. "Footsteps, weak jerks. What if it's just some drunk, a vagrant, or someone else? Found a way in that we missed, and now wandering around. I'm going out." "Are you crazy?" Havel exclaimed. "But what if?" "Who?" "Well, who?" The Viking raised the flashlight and pointed it at the door. "The ghost of Hamlet's father. That damn hangman. A kid broken by bullying and climbed into a noose. Glass doesn't break here. Doors don't open when it wants. Do you think a door would stop him? Do you think he decided to play cat and mouse? I don't give a damn about his games. If he wants to say something, let him say it to my face." The fiery Viking opened the lock with the prepared key and emerged into the darkness of the corridor, like real Vikings must have marched onto the deck of an enemy's longship, taken by boarding in the middle of the cold waves. "Hey, where are you? Who are you?" A sharp voice echoed in the corridor. "Come out here." A suffocating silence fell upon them, as if the very air was saturated with an inevitable sense of dread, palpable against their skin. Fear had become so tangible that Pavel could almost cut through it with the knife clenched in his sweaty palm. Lena, worn out, pressed herself against her friend, straining to distinguish the sounds reverberating down the corridor, desperately seeking some kind of answer. From afar, faint footsteps reached them, like a ghost emerging from the room where they found the corpse. Then came a strange, muffled sound, escaping from Max's throat, filling Lena with anxiety, and suddenly, from the depths of the upper corridor, came a word, almost beckoning them to action: "Run." The silence was abruptly shattered by the loud bang of an old metal bucket, thrown forcefully down the corridor. Lena screamed, and Pavel gripped the knife tightly, ready to defend them from the unknown horror beyond the door. Outside, the light from the lantern still flickered, as if its owner was searching for something. Max, entering the room, looked haggard and terrified. He closed the door and locked it, as if trying to isolate the horror that lurked outside. "Max, what was that noise?" Pavel asked tensely, peering at his friend's back as he leaned against the door, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "Nothing there, Posher. Just emptiness," Max replied evenly, without turning around. "Forget about it." "Do you think we'll believe this nonsense?" Pavel snapped irritably. There was something there. Someone was rattling the door, making noise, and we heard a voice. "Don't yell, Pash. You're just imagining things," Max said, his expression barely changing. "I have nothing to say." "Are you trying to convince us or yourself?" Lena asked, rising from the floor and shaking her head. "Perhaps both." Max reached for his knife and hesitated before continuing. "But right now, we need to calm down. It's time to rest." Pavel leaned back against the wall, glancing disapprovingly at Max, then clicked the button, folded the knife, and tossed it towards his friend. Max holstered the weapon, sat down, and let out a heavy sigh before extinguishing the lantern. "I need to think." Max's tired voice sounded almost pleading in the darkness. "As they say, the morning is wiser than the evening." Pavel attempted a smile. Despite the tension, "There's something to that," Max replied. "Let's just relax and rest. The lantern is burning far away. It's safe here." The couple silently pressed against the wall, settling into place, and soon, in the office as well as throughout the building, silence reigned once more. But now no one could predict how long it would last or what would disrupt it next. However, fatigue and nervous tension gripped them again, and the group awoke to the light filtering through the murky windows of the office. Groaning and stretching, they rose from the floor, flexing their stiff limbs. Lena discovered she had bitten her palm during the night, prompting Max to carefully disinfect the wounds and bandage them. All was quiet. Pavel watched Max with curiosity and didn't press further. He had called off after the night's events and understood that Max wasn't one to withhold important information. But they didn't speak of the night's events, all agreeing to remain silent as they tried to recover, gazing at the world outside through the murky windows. Lena gazed soddily at the car parked beneath the window. "Let's check the kitchen, maybe," Max suggested, as if reading her mind. "Perhaps we'll find something there." In the corridor, a broken mop handle lay on the floor, and a crumpled bucket sat near the wall, almost blocking the entrance to the side wing. Pavel glanced at Max with curiosity, but said nothing. When they tried to turn the faucets in the kitchen, nothing happened at first. As they were about to leave, one of the faucets suddenly hummed and expelled a bent tube of brownish substance. Lena thought it resembled excrement rather than rust. Immediately, a repulsive odor filled the kitchen, making their eyes water, and Lena quickly rushed outside, fighting back nausea. Max promptly shut off the taps, and they exited the kitchen together. Then Max headed to the gym, where he noticed that the door to the equipment room was broken, and he spent some time there making noise. Pavel and Lena stood in the gym, holding hands, resembling schoolchildren caught misbehaving. "Everything is falling apart," Max said, guiltily spreading his hands as they exited the gym. "It's all slipping through our fingers like sand." Pavel nodded, not particularly surprised. They stood, looking at each other. The silence became uncomfortably tense. It was unusual for two old friends. "All right," Max ran a hand through his hair. "Let's go to the office. I'll explain everything there. It's not easy. I was an honor student in school, honestly," he suddenly confessed as they walked down the corridor. "But it seems I only got smarter in college. In school, I was just a typical jock. Yeah, everyone was afraid of me, even the teachers. But in college, well, that's a whole different ballgame." The sturdy young man shifted uncomfortably, his fingers nervously tangling in his hair as he hunched forward. He was feeble, all over, a constant complainer. Everyone took advantage of him, taunted him, and he never fought back, just whimpered and sniveled. You know, disgusting. It was infuriating. And then, Max glanced back, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He had some issue with his joints. His hips, I think. He wobbled when he walked, swayed his hips like a flower, and shuffled Lena interjected wearily. Yes. The Viking confirmed after a long silence. Shuffled. We used to steal his bag, toss it around, run away from him, and he couldn't chase us. Shuffled along, whimpering. Well, he could have gone to the teachers, couldn't he? Or done something. He abruptly cut himself off, realizing he was making excuses. And we tossed the bag back and forth, yelling. Max swallowed. Run, run. As they entered the office above the entrance, Max turned to Pavel and Lena. It's sickening to remember now. I'd even forgotten completely. Well, he's grown out of it, changed, really. Pavel, you know me. So, hold on a minute. Pavel played with the dimples on his cheeks. You brought us to a place where they tormented a similar kid to the point of hanging. Knowing you had the exact same story behind you, I didn't remember that at all. The sturdy lad exploded. I'm telling you, it was ages ago, and I tried to erase it all from my memory. I only started remembering when that damn echo suddenly said run. Well, and at night, he ran his hands through his thick mane again. I recognized those footsteps instantly. That was how he walked, dragging both legs. What did you see? His friend asked harshly. I don't know, Max began, almost shouting, staring into Pavel's darkening face. I don't know, Pavel. It came out of that room, where the hanged man was. It seemed like him, with that shuffling gait, but also not. Skin hanging, skull face. I keep thinking, maybe it's a nervous breakdown for me. Just my imagination. And the bucket had a nervous breakdown too, Lena said sleepily, sliding down the wall to crouch. Got scared, ran into the corridor. Right, Max? He continued uncertainly, looked at me. Run, it asked, and then, I don't know. It seemed to get down on all fours, elbows and knees like spider joints, twisting in different directions, legs all twisted at the hips, and when it dashed along the corridor into the darkness, I couldn't even catch up with a flashlight. Along the floor, the walls, the ceiling, knocked over the bucket, and that's it. He sighed nervously and helplessly spread his hands. That's all I saw, guys. All. Pavel suddenly asked sharply, stepping forward. That's damn well not all, Max. Want me to tell you everything? He was advancing on the backing away sturdy lad, who suddenly seemed to shrink and diminish in size, retreating between the desks toward the blackboard. Do you even remember what happened to that kid you lot bullied? Did he also climb into a noose? I don't know. I don't even remember what grade he was with us. Maybe he transferred. Or maybe not. Maybe he did too. Just not as obviously. You brought exactly the same shit here that everything's gone to hell over. Wanted a brainstorm. Here you go. For sheer madness. This creature needs you. Pavel was already yelling at the bewildered Max, shoving him in the chest. It's you it's keeping here. Got it. Playing with you. And we, along with Lena, got caught in the hammer too. While we were at it. We'll all croak here because of you. Enough. A quiet voice from behind made the boy startle and turn around. Cut it out. Want a wild theory? She wearily pushed herself off the wall and stood up. All the anger vanished instantly at her sight, and Pavel felt his heart constrict with overwhelming tenderness. Over the past day, the warm, drowsy friend from the back seat, with a slightly husky, somewhat seductive voice and cute tangled hair had almost disappeared. In her place stood a tired, fear-ridden girl, dark spots under her eyes, hair even more disheveled, no longer lending any charm to her now delicate and lost face, only enhancing its tired and bewildered look. Something's decaying excessively here, he remembered. Over there, through the office from ours, a corpse has been hanging for several years. Lena pointed to the wall, just swinging in the noose, not laid to rest as it should be. Here's a version for you. Maybe it needs to be buried somehow, like a human. Take it down, lay it to rest, cover it with something. God, even recite the Lord's Prayer over it. I don't know. What if it helps? Pavel turned to his friend, and for a while, they looked at each other askance. Then the guy shook his head and rubbed his face with his hands. Max, I'm sorry, I lost it, he squeezed out. Truth is, it's all nonsense. I've known you for a long time, You're a normal guy. Who knows what anyone did in school? We were all there. Not angels. I'm just on edge because of all this. Because of the night pranks. Because of Lena. I messed up. No, you're right. The strapping lad started, but Pavel cut him off. No, I'm damn well not right, he interrupted. Whatever's going on here. It's like in one of King's books. Dragging fears from the head, digging into the brains. Who knows what my decayed brain will dredge up next? Max, forgive me. He reached out his hand, and the Viking, pausing just for a moment, pressed his palm into it. Okay, buddy, let's move on. He threw an almost habitual, almost calm look over his friend's shoulder at the girl. Ready to visit our weirdo? Near the open door to the office, with the hangman, Max noticeably became nervous, but he pulled himself together and stubbornly entered first. He stood inside for a long time and remained silent. Pavel and Lena followed, also not saying a word. There was nothing to talk about. The office was empty. In silence, they returned to the almost familiar room with decorative trees and a black Niva parked outside the windows. Lena pressed her forehead against the cold glass and almost absent-mindedly stared at it, trying to understand how the familiar and rational world could be simultaneously so close and so unattainable. When the thought of water in the bottle came to mind, her throat dried up, her cracked lips hurt, and she desperately pushed it away. A bitten palm throbbed. Pavel paced from the door to the window, messing up his hair, going through various rescue options in his head. But nothing sensible came to mind. Instead, silly thoughts about school intruded, unpleasant situations, fights, insults. No, he had never consciously participated in bullying. But who knows? Max sat under the blackboard, leaning against the wall, twirling the heavy handle of a switchblade in his hands. It was he who broke the prolonged silence after half an hour. The keys from the car rattled on the floor, rolling to the feet of the puzzled, frozen Pavel. So, guys, Max said calmly, rummaging in his pockets, let's hear my brilliant plan. He took out a flashlight, medical supplies, and documents from his pockets, neatly placing them in front of himself. For now, the only sensible and plausible version we have is yours, Pasha, he said evenly, settling more comfortably. Namely, some unknown creature sniffed out a scumbag like the one that spawned it in its home, woke up, and decided to play. You two aren't involved, so it's logical to assume you'll suffer and die for nothing. Personally, I see only one way out. What are you muttering about? Pavel stepped towards him, but Max sharply pressed the knife against his chest. Stay, he said shortly, literally pinning his friend to the floor. This was the same Max who always acted decisively and meticulously. And the guy had no doubt that the tip of the knife was now aimed straight at his heart. One press of the button, a click, and, all right, here's the plan, the Viking said with a sigh, looking thoughtfully ahead. Then corrected himself, you follow him. When I'm done, grab your things and head to the car. I think it'll let you go. Sit inside and get the hell out of here. Leave my body here. First, you won't be able to overpower me, even together. Second, it might not let go. It's not worth the risk. Got it? Max, this is madness, Pavel intervened. You can't do this. Stop. Isn't the pressure getting to you? I can't think clearly either, buddy, but this isn't the way. And what is the way out? Max asked despondently, looking him in the eyes. To die of dehydration here. Wait for that thing to come up with something else. To end up eating each other. Max, Lena's voice weakly came from the window, and Max turned to her. Lena, forgive me. Okay, I didn't mean for it to go like this. Pasha, forgive me. And he pressed the button. Max, Pavel shouted, lunging forward. But Max had already folded the knife back with a click and threw it under his friend's feet. Take it too, he hoarsely said, collapsing to the side. Just in case. A crimson stain spread on the Viking's chest. Blood pulsed in spurts from the wound, gradually subsiding. Pavel collapsed to his knees beside the still quivering body. Not knowing what to do, he pressed his hand to the wound, barely feeling a heartbeat there, let alone a punctured heart. Max's eyes had already dimmed and glazed over. The guy hastily checked his neck, finding no pulse there either. Only the warm elasticity of the trained body. There was nothing. Max, he groaned, helplessly driving his fist into the rotten wood of the boards, not noticing how the thin splinters cut into his skin. Max, damn it, what have you done? Behind him, Lena quietly sobbed, and the guy seemed to switch. He began hastily sorting through the items in Max's pockets. Documents, a knife. He didn't touch the bandages and napkins, deciding they were no longer needed. Lena, let's go. The guy quickly got up and went to the abandoned keys to the Neva. The girl stood beside them, covering her face with her hands and staring in horror at the fallen Viking. In her mind, it still couldn't fit that this huge and strong man, recently seeming unbeatable and imperturbable, the man her friend simply called his weapon, without a hint of irony in his voice, now lay like this, in a pool of his own blood, dead. It was so unreal that even amidst the events unfolding around her, it seemed wild and improbable. Lena, Pavel gently shook her by the shoulders and forcibly turned her gaze away from the fallen Maxim. Let's go. We need to leave, you hear? What's done is done. And maybe we still have a chance. Let's go. He took her hand, and she followed him, as if in a dream, through the doors, to the stairs, and down, to the main entrance. There Pavel hurriedly grabbed the rusty latch and pulled it towards himself. It didn't budge. What the hell? The guy exclaimed and pulled even harder. But nothing changed, and suddenly, with an inexplicable wave of apathy washing over her, the girl realized that nothing would work. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, but it did. While her boyfriend struggled and scratched his skin against the latch, trying to open the door, her self-assurance only grew. I guess I'm useless without water, Pavel suddenly sighed. To hell with this door, let's go. He dragged her by the hand back into the corridor, where, grabbing the first brick shard from the floor, he held it at the window with all his might, instinctively turning away from the shards. Lena didn't turn away, so she saw perfectly well how the stone hit the narrow streak of dirty glass and bounced off, not even scratching it. No, the guy muttered, desperately looking around. No, not like this. Everything should be different. That's right, echoed the reply, responding to the echoing cries under the high vaults. He grabbed another shard and threw it at another window, and another. No, he yelled, attacking the indifferent glass with a hail of stones. What do you want, damn it? Do you want us all to die? He suddenly froze, knowing what he would hear in response. And the echo didn't disappoint. Enough, it agreed, after a long pause, from the far end of the corridor. Wait, Pavel froze, seizing the sudden thought that came to his mind. Wait, I got it. He's not dead. That's why nothing changed. He missed. Injured, but alive, right? Lena looked at her friend with sadness, fully understanding that it was just an illusion, but unable to deprive him of even a glimmer of hope right now. We have bandages there. We'll stop the bleeding now. He's a tough guy. He'll survive. And then we'll figure out who's who. Let's go. They hurried again, barely holding onto the pulling hand, corridors and stairs replacing each other, as if in a nightmare, where, probably, they were. Her throat burned, her eyes stung with dry tears, her stomach contracted with spasms, but she still held herself together. They burst into the room with the trees, and Pavel rushed to his lying friend, but then stopped abruptly. They stood there for a while, like students late for a lesson. Then the guy let out a muffled groan and grabbed his hair with his fingers. The body was gone. On the floor was a small, brown, already drying puddle and scattered bandages with napkins. The house took what it needed. Lena wearily sank to her knees and cried without tears. The guy cautiously approached the spot where Max's strong body had just lain. He tentatively touched the blood on the floor with his fingers, looked at his trembling friend, and didn't say a word. After some time, they sat under the window, through which the car was visible. Pavel cradled the stunned girl in his arms, and whispered comforting nonsense in her ear, in which he himself didn't believe. Lena hardly heard his words before her eyes was a half-empty plastic bottle of water on the back seat of the Neva. Then, with the first rays of morning, sunlight fell on it through the window and threw cheerful glints into her eyes. A drop of this water still cooled the corner of her lips when she climbed out of the car. Then suddenly, the bottle of water was replaced by streams of blood gushing from Max's chest, and she felt nauseous. She dryly retched, bumping her knee against Pavel's, but couldn't bring herself to vomit, just shuddered a few times in spasms. And at that moment, Pavel suddenly understood everything, and he made a decision in an instant. "Len," he cautiously called out. "Lena, listen, I have an idea. We need to get to the roof. Can you hear me? We need to climb up there. Let's go." "Why?" she whimpered, leaning against his knee, recovering from spasms. "I don't want to go anywhere anymore. It's all meaningless now." No, listen, I think I've figured it out." He nudged her, urging her to stand up. "Let's go. I'll show you everything from the roof. Come on." Once again, she obediently followed him through the corridors and stairs, beginning to think that perhaps this would be her end, not noticing any difference, continuing to walk with uncertain steps on the crumbling floors, alongside those who remained outside. The twilight of the second night was beginning to envelop the ominous building. When they reached the roof, the fresh air slightly revived her senses, and she withdrew her hand from Pavel's. "I won't go far." Lena shook her head. "I'm afraid of heights, I've told you. I know it's foolish now." No, you don't need to go anywhere," he said, cautiously stepping back to the edge of the roof. "Listen, I told you, Max, he's the key." He understood everything correctly. Damn it, he was already, well, a decent guy. He just didn't calculate it. "Pasha, stop," Lena tensely said, watching as her friend approached the edge of the roof from the facade side. "You listen, it's all true," he continued hurriedly, starting to rummage in his pockets. "It's holding those who drove others to suicide. It's obvious. And what did I do? I yelled at Max right in his face that we're going to die here because of him. I morally crushed him. That's the thing. Pasha, now it is holding me here. You understand?" "Pasha, no, don't you dare," the girl suddenly shouted, so loudly that her friend flinched. "It's been absurd from the very beginning. Both Max and you've misunderstood something. It's all like that, Lenka, all one-to-one." Pavel suddenly shook his head and tossed the car keys to her feet. "You're going downstairs now, to the door." "No, you will, because there's a concrete awning over the entrance. It's 2 meters with a hook. Yes, 3 floors, high ceilings, but there's a chance. You'll go down, get in the car, and drive for help. Don't touch me. Only doctors." "Pavlik, no," the girl barely whispered, sinking to her knees and helplessly scratching the dirty surface of the roof with her fingernails. "Don't leave me here alone. You promised. You also have to promise me something, Lenka," he said seriously, looking her in the eyes. "Right now, do you hear me?" She weakly nodded her head and reached out to him, unable to find the words. 3 floors of the gloomy building, full of unknown nightmares, suddenly loomed behind her like a dark monolith, through which she would have to go alone, until "You promise me to survive, because I don't want it to be in vain." Pavel pointed his finger behind his back. "Promise me, right now." "I promise," the girl whispered silently, with her lips alone, losing her last hope and not believing a single word she uttered. "I will survive. Now go." The guy swallowed hard. "Hurry, but be careful. Take care of yourself. The keys. Take the keys and go to the car. Go." Torn from his knees by his desperate cry, she grabbed the keys from the roof and stumbled into the gap of the open door. The staircase greeted her with gathering twilight. Lena hurried down, stumbling, clutching at the walls and railings. Bright scenes of her slipping and breaking her leg on the stairs spun in her head. She imagined herself lying here, waiting for night and new footsteps, from which not even the imagined barrier of the decaying door would protect her, while her beloved man died outside on the concrete awning above the entrance. Already approaching the main doors, Lena heard a dull thud from somewhere above. The sound almost made her knees buckle, and she frantically grasped the rusty bar of the latch. She seized the short handle and pulled with all her might, twisting the latch in the rusted ears of the metal door. She could already feel the rusty crust cracking under her pull, as the rod rotated around its axis, making room for itself to move outward. A painful jerk, almost dislocating her shoulder, brought her back to reality. The latch didn't budge a millimeter, still forming an indifferent hole with the old door. Lena skeptically stared at it for a few seconds, then pulled again, and suddenly emitted a frightened cry, more akin to the clucking of a bird than a sound born from human, albeit dry, vocal cords. The girl hit the metal door with her whole body, jerking the latch back and forth, emitting bird-like desperate screams from her parched throat. In vain. Reeling, she darted into the corridor, grabbed a brick fragment, and threw it point-blank at the glass, not even bothering to shield her eyes. The fragment casually bounced off the murky glass, scratching her cheek. Throwing her head back, Lena let out a torturous, prolonged howl, in which it seemed her last strength dissolved and sank into the growing darkness under the arches. No. The plaintive cry flowed through the corridors, stairwells, and offices, awakening in them a slightly surprised, but quite confident echo. No. It asked from one side, then from the other. No. Why not? Concluded the familiar, insinuating voice in her head. Everything's right. Everything should be like this. She stared blankly at the darkening window, losing her last connection to reality, utterly unable to comprehend how all this was possible. How she ended up here, in this abandoned, terrifying house, completely alone, without the stoic, self-assured Viking, without her dear, close Pavel. Posher. Lena flinched as if slapped. He's there right now, on the ledge, right under the office windows. Maybe alive. Staggering, as if drunk, sliding over the brick debris, she went back to the staircase. At the threshold of the office, the girl froze, unable to force herself to approach the window and see there the broken, bloodied body of her beloved. Yet she went, driven by a force unknown even to herself, forcing herself step by step towards the murky, dirt-covered window. The window, still transparent enough to show her what the fall from the roof onto the wide concrete awning above the main entrance had done to her Pavel. Step by agonizing step, she stared outside. There appeared the roof of the car, the edge of the awning, hiding its passenger side. Lena hesitated slightly and took another step. Then, by some force she couldn't comprehend, she took another one. On the dirty concrete, a faint outline of a dark stain flickered before her, resembling a semicircle. Had it been there before when she glanced out the window at the car? She couldn't recall. You remember, the insidious voice accused. With each step, the stain became clearer, sharper. Yes, she remembered. Initially, there was nothing there, just dry, dusty concrete under the old canopy. But now, there was a pool of blood, and the semicircular stain reminded her of the curved shards of broken glass. Merciless and relentless, Lena approached the window, no longer surprised, and stared down, engulfed in the expanse of black, almost nocturnal blood. The puddle was too extensive to entertain the idea that its source was still alive, especially when there was no body around. Lena couldn't say for sure how long she stood there, immersed in apathy, devoid of thoughts and feelings. At some point, she suddenly realized that the murky window glass was growing dimmer, consumed by darkness too quickly for twilight. Then, with the same indifference, she understood that the tightness enveloping her from all sides was caused by the encroaching darkness from the ceiling, the corners, the windows. Staggering, she turned away from the window, prepared to face what had come for her, for the last time. But before her was something entirely different, though she couldn't say it surprised her. In the middle of the office, a neatly tied empty noose hung from the ceiling, waiting. Lena hesitated, taking an uncertain step towards it, before darkness completely engulfed her, and the girl lost consciousness. The noose was the last thing Lena saw before darkness descended. It was also the first thing she saw when darkness receded. Though receded was too strong a word, Twilight thickened, and in the unlit building, darkness was already asserting its dominance. Yet the faint outline of the rope hanging from the ceiling remained distinctly visible. Lena swallowed, immediately coughing, the sharpness in her parched throat almost unbearable. But this pain reminded her of her existence, alive, and something else. I will survive. Despite the dryness in her throat, Lena gathered her strength to rise from the floor. Approaching the noose, she placed the fingers of her bandaged hand into it. The fibers of the rope tickled her, seeming absolutely real, even more real than everything else around her. The noose hung conveniently. No need to rely on rickety chairs. Just jump, grab higher with her hands, pull up, put her head in, and, for a moment, Lena vividly imagined herself struggling for the last breaths of air, barely touching the floor with the tips of her dusty sneakers. They would scratch the boards weaker and weaker until they stopped altogether. "Is this what you want?" she hoarsely asked, looking at the noose. "Is this how it works here? Everyone for themselves." The noose silently agreed. Lena's hands fell helplessly to her sides, and she jerked from sudden pain. Looking down, she was surprised to see the ribbed edge of Maxim's switchblade protruding from the pocket of her jeans. She couldn't even remember when she had managed to slip it in there. Unconsciously gathering the items abandoned by Pavlik, the thought of Pavlik stirred a dull ache and despair in her chest. Slowly, she withdrew the heavy handle from her pocket, holding it in her palm, and then, almost mechanically, she pressed the button, releasing the blade, and with a swift, strong motion, she slashed the hanging loop. The sturdy rope didn't give way at first, so she swung the knife again, turning the inviting circle into two uneven tails that now hung beneath the useless noose with bewilderment. "Disappear. Got it," she hissed with a ragged voice. "I'm still alive." With a dry click, she folded the blade and headed towards the exit, not quite understanding what to do next. The corridor greeted her with an even denser darkness than the one left in the office. Standing amidst it, she quickly lost the courage that had suddenly awakened in her for a few seconds. Another night in the building lay ahead, alone with an unknown, sinister force that, as she now understood, didn't care at all about what you did in the past. It needed everyone who entered to do only what she had done in the past. One way or another, the sense of impending danger intensified along with the darkness, causing her spine to stiffen with the feeling of being watched from behind. The open door of the office behind her suddenly filled her with dizzying horror. The thought of returning there and spending another night in the familiar place flickered, but she immediately dismissed it. What if in the darkness she suddenly heard Max struggling against the wall? Or if Pavlik quietly tapped on the window from outside, begging to be let in? Lena shuddered painfully, finally losing the last shreds of courage. She almost forcibly forced herself to look around, already expecting to see someone's silhouette in the doorway, but she saw something that frightened her much more. It seemed to her that she couldn't be more frightened, but how wrong she was. The opening of the office was empty, but it didn't bring relief, because nearby the door of the adjacent rooms stood wide open, and the last remnants of daylight gleamed through the openings of those offices, whose doors she could see from where she stood, pressing her hands against her spasmodically squeezing chest. All the office doors were open, whether in anticipation of her entering them herself or in readiness to release something from them. Elbows and knees sticking out like spider joints, Max's voice sounded in her head. Legs twisted completely in the hips. No, that was for Max. What would come to her to push her to the final decision? Her Pavlik, terribly broken and bloodied, with sharp rib fragments protruding from his chest. Gloomy Max with a dark spot on his t-shirt. Or, she shuddered, or was she waiting for a whole parade? Everyone who had ever accidentally or out of curiosity crawled into this concrete spider's trap. They were all here now. Those who crashed in a desperate jump from a high roof, those who were cut by relentless shards of glass, those who broke bones in panicked rushes up the stairs, or simply quietly breathed their last, losing faith in salvation. And, of course, those who hanged themselves, those who accepted the silent invitation of the hanging loop from the ceiling. "I'm still breathing," the girl whispered, her voice pleading, barely audible, lacking confidence. As if possessed, her legs led her to the door of the office, where she once stumbled upon the skeleton-like remains of a hangman. She couldn't grasp why she was drawn there, but with each step, she approached the dim light of the evening twilight seeping through the door, half expecting to see someone's silhouette emerge. What awaited her beyond the door? Would the owner of the noose shuffle out, dragging his feet, perhaps to reproach her for waking him with an ill-timed joke and intrusive curiosity, or maybe finally to explain that she was the cause of it all, not the careless words and actions of her companions? But no one emerged. Trembling with sticky horror, Lena peered into the office and let out a quiet whimper. An empty noose hung indifferently in the middle of the room from the ceiling. Turning away, she staggered into the darkness of the corridor. The encroaching twilight blurred her thoughts, and she struggled to remember why she was there. A lump in her throat threatened to suffocate her. Lena tried to swallow or clear her throat, but all she could manage was to whimper without tears, echoing in the darkness like the plaintive cries of a bird. The sounds reverberated in the gloom, returning with a strange echo, as if somewhere nearby someone else was screaming inhumanly, either mocking her or suffering alongside her in pain and despair. To her surprise, Lena found herself in the middle of the gym. Apparently, unknowingly, she had returned to where it all began, in the darkness of the two-story hall, next to the tall windows. As if the culmination of everything that had happened, there hung a rope with an empty noose at the end instead of the rope that hung from the gloomy ceiling. The girl moved towards it without resistance. The old mat sprang slightly under her feet. The knots of the decaying rope tangled around her legs. Just a little jump, a pull-up. Suddenly, Lena remembered that she had once been one of the few girls in the class who could climb to the very top, to the approving cheers of the gym teacher. It was the only place where her fear of heights left her, because she didn't look down. Looking back meant looking into the abyss. It's always scary. She looked up, where the rope was tightly knotted near the ceiling. She had a goal, and she didn't stop until her palm touched it. Her parched lips painfully cracked, stretching into a smile. "I'm still here," the girl whispered to the noose and, jumping up, grabbed the rope. At first, she doubted that anything would come of it, that she simply didn't have the strength. But they emerged, arising either from her withered yet still young and healthy body, or from the depths she had never suspected. Grabbing the prickly rope again and again, groaning in pain from the ache in her bitten palm, she pulled herself up again and again. When her feet finally managed to grip the swinging lower end of the rope, it became a little easier. Sometimes, Lena seemed to descend back into the twilight of consciousness, but her hands and feet acted on their own, until suddenly she realized that she was hanging under the ceiling, looking at the knot. It was smaller than the usual rope knot. Her hands trembled from the effort, but her fingers clutched the rope with a death grip. After securing the too thin support with her feet, Lena gathered her strength for a few seconds, and then she carefully pulled the knife out of her pocket. The blade snapped dryly, shooting out from the narrow slit in the ribbed handle, its heavy edge almost wrenching the weapon from Lena's tired, numb hand as she spasmodically clenched it. Even in the thick darkness, she could almost see dark stains on the knife. Maxim's blood, spilled by his own hand, under the sway of deception, convinced that it was all over. It felt as if she could sense the warmth of Pavlik's hand, who had handed her this knife, while standing on the edge of the roof. He, too, would never have taken that step if he hadn't been misled, convinced that there was no other way out. It was all a lie. The truth was that, "I'll survive," Lena rasped wickedly, slashing with the razor-sharp edge just below the knot. The rope swelled, unraveling into a wreath of severed fibers, and, unable to hold, snapped. The brief seconds of falling seemed almost euphoric to the girl. She floated, spinning backward, watching as the knot slowly receded under the ceiling. She saw the wind tousling her tangled hair above her face, the rope twirling beside her. Even the cut in her parched throat and the pain in her cracked lips momentarily seemed to recede, leaving her floating in gentle weightlessness. With her last conscious movement, she tossed the knife aside, and then weightlessness vanished, replaced by a heavy blow to her back that knocked her unconscious. When Lena came to, the high windows still let in fragments of ashen light, indicating that she hadn't lain among the shards of old rope and scattered mats for long. Her scalp throbbed, her throat burned, her lips stung, her bandaged palm pulsed, but nothing else bothered her anymore. And that scared her the most. What if she had broken her spine? What if she lay here motionless, waiting for the night, for the sound of footsteps, for death? Almost forcibly, Lena clenched her hand into a fist, confirming its mobility. Then, cautiously, slowly, she ran her fingers over the fabric of her jeans, checking for signs of urinary incontinence, indicative of spinal injury. The jeans were dry and stiff, just like her throat. Lifting her head, Lena fanned the tips of her sneakers and, suppressing a burst of horror, wiggled her foot. A comforting white flash flickered in the darkness, swaying. The girl sighed with relief and rolled onto her side, got onto her knees, and cried out in pain as a sharp spike pierced her back, almost throwing her back onto the dusty mats. Taking a breath, she cautiously stood up, trying to keep her back straight. Apparently, the fall hadn't left her spine unscathed, but she could still move and walk. And that was the most important thing now. Groaning and occasionally jerking from the pain in her back, Lena gathered the rope, which, to her surprise, still lay in tangled coils nearby, and as she staggered towards the exit from the gym, into the darkness of the corridors, the echoing dim vaults and dusty staircases plunged her into a half-sleep again. Vague figures flashed in the open classroom doors on the periphery of her vision. It seemed like someone else was walking alongside her, right behind her, but she didn't look back. Looking back meant looking into the abyss. The roof greeted her with a gust of fresh wind and a faint pink strip of the departing sunset on the horizon. Clarity came to her mind. Almost confidently, she approached the edge of the roof, where a bent piece of pipe protruded from it, which had once served as the beginning of a fire escape. Slipping the loop over this bend, Lena leaned back with all her weight, screaming in pain, and the loop tightly gripped its unusually cold and stiff prey. Exhaling with sobs, the girl threw the rope over the edge and stopped, gathering her strength. She had no inkling of how to descend with such agony coursing through her back, nor did she dare to contemplate the possibility of further injuring her spine. Uncertainty gnawed at her. How far would the rope reach? From what height would she have to leap onto the overgrown, yet still concrete or asphalt courtyard below? And there lingered the unsettling thought, would the rope vanish into thin air, dissolving like mist as soon as she crossed the threshold of the wall? But amidst this uncertainty, one certainty pierced through. The familiar dread of heights had vanished, replaced by a relentless determination. Her goal awaited below, and she vowed not to cease until her palm brushed against it. The abyss, forbidding to gaze into, lay behind her, and Lena refused to look back. Her gaze locked onto weary, demanding eyes, as if questioning why she hung from the wrong end of the noose. As long as you're alive, you haven't lost. Her words finally pierced the air, sharp and resolute. She attempted to land with a roll, but sharp pain shot through her back, and the attempt ended in a critical failure. The ground met her feet with a thunderous crash, hurling her sideways. A fiery explosion erupted in her left hip. An agonizing pain instantly shot through her spine. Lena collapsed onto the ground, cautiously avoiding the jagged thorns of dry grass. She scraped her elbow and cheek, and when she finally managed to draw a breath, a piercing scream erupted from her parched throat. But she was alive, and she was free. In front of the main entrance porch, behind which she now lay sprawled, stood a black Neva, with a half-filled bottle of water on the back seat. For the strong young woman she had been just 48 hours ago, this was beyond imaginable. But for the one who now shivered in helpless sobs on the grass, it felt like an entirely different world. Yet she had a goal. Lena brushed aside the thought of standing up, feeling the searing pain in her left hip, which seemed to only intensify. Instead, she crawled, relying on her uninjured leg, squeezing out each step amidst the deafening pain in her back. Clumps of stiff, dry grass broke beneath her weight, cutting into her hands, and sometimes it felt like she was trapped again, climbing up a rough rope where the knot reached towards the ceiling. Her consciousness began to drift, like a ship in a nighttime storm. She was like a lost vessel at sea, sometimes cresting on the wave's peak, sometimes plunging into the abyss between the black waves of pain in her back and hip. Stormy waves seemed to surge in her mind, sweeping away feelings and thoughts, like a sea whirlpool that sweeps everything in its path. But time and again, she found the strength within herself to climb to the next crest, trying to glimpse the flickering light of a distant lighthouse, ignited in the impenetrable night fog. With painstaking care, she swung her legs over the edge, initiating a gradual descent, shifting her weight onto the rope. It bit into her fingers, teasing the threshold of existence, threatening to whisk her away on a final journey to the earth below. Like a ghost from recent memory in the gym, she cautiously maneuvered her hands along the rope, observing as rows of brickwork slipped past her gaze. A fleeting notion crossed her mind: perhaps the rope had vanished while she lay unconscious. It offered a glimmer of hope. Somehow, the unseen orchestrator of events had chosen to wait for now. Her legs ceased to feel support somewhere around the second floor. For a time, Lena descended solely with the strength of her arms, clutching the rope spasmodically, endeavoring to shorten the distance to the ground by another meter or two. At last, she realized she hung precariously close to the end. Something dark loomed at the edge of her vision, and as she turned her head, she discerned she hung adjacent to a window in the second-floor corridor. Nearby lay the entrance to the room, with decorative trees in barrels, a pool of Maxim's blood staining the floor. In the darkness of the corridor, something stirred. With mounting horror, Lena watched as an awkward, quivering figure moved from the other side of the window. After several heart-stopping moments, she realized the figure did not approach from the corridor, but emerged directly from the murky, dirty glass to which she clung, turned and pressing her hip against the wall, suspended almost face to face. The figure, emerging from the dark depths of the inaccessible window, morphed and undulated, assuming the forms of a hanged person, then a limping teenager, then Pavlik moving with faltering steps. Eventually, before her eyes materialized the face of a 12-year-old teenager, weary and haggard, with greasy bangs cascading onto his face and eyes brimming with endless fatigue. In them, she sensed weariness, but also something more, a demanding question that Lena suddenly grasped. "Because it can't be like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because this is not the way out. However it turns out, this is not the way out. I almost pity you, but you were mistaken." The black car never sat like a sentinel amidst the darkness, its presence commanding attention against the backdrop of the night. Within its metallic frame lay the promise of mobility, of escape from the suffocating confines of despair. Water, life. Lena's desire for survival surged within her like a tempest, refusing to be quelled by the surrounding chaos. Every fiber of her being was attuned to the singular goal that drove her forward, propelling her through the murky depths of uncertainty. As she approached the car, its form loomed larger, casting a shadow over her as if to challenge her resolve. With trembling hands, she reached for the handle, each movement laden with the weight of anticipation. But as her fingers closed around the cold metal, she was met with resistance, the door remaining steadfastly shut against her efforts. Locked, the realization struck Lena like a physical blow, the key to her salvation seemingly lost in the abyss of her misfortune. Panic threatened to engulf her, but deep within her subconscious, a glimmer of determination flickered to life. With a mixture of desperation and hope, Lena searched her pockets, her fingers fumbling until they closed around the familiar shape of the key. With a trembling hand, she inserted it into the lock, the familiar click of the mechanism echoing through the stillness of the night. Relief flooded through her as the door swung open, revealing the sanctuary that lay within. Without hesitation, Lena climbed into the driver's seat, her eyes fixed on the prize that awaited her. The bottle of water beckoned to her like a beacon of hope, its contents a lifeline in the darkness. With trembling hands, she unscrewed the cap, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. But even as she drank, Pavlik's voice from the back seat served as a reminder of the fragility of her situation. She forced herself to take slow, measured sips, each one a testament to her resilience in the face of adversity. As the water revitalized her, Lena became acutely aware of her surroundings, the sounds of the night mingling with the rhythmic hum of the engine. In the distance, the faint glow of headlights served as a reminder that she was not alone in her struggle. With renewed determination, Lena prepared to embark on the next leg of her journey. She fastened her seatbelt, her movements deliberate despite the pain that threatened to consume her. With a deep breath, she shifted gears, each click of the lever a step closer to her ultimate goal. As the Niva roared to life, Lena felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins. The abandoned building loomed ahead, its darkened windows a testament to the challenges that lay ahead. But Lena was undeterred. With steady hands and unwavering resolve, she steered the car towards the gates, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. With each passing moment, she drew closer to her destination, her spirit unbroken despite the obstacles that lay in her path. The cry of agony drowned out the grind of gear shifting. The car surged forward, but Lena instinctively slammed her foot on the gas pedal. Gripping the wheel tightly once more, she barely made it. The wheel plunged into an unseen pit. In the darkness, the Niva playfully leapt, narrowly avoiding a collision with the metal pole, once adorned with a welded rebar door. A sharp twist of the wheel at the last moment caused Lena to brush the side mirror against the pole, which snapped off with a crunch. Something hissed behind her, and suddenly, she found herself beyond the gates. The car confidently tackled the bumps, causing the driver to cry out in pain intermittently, but nonetheless liberating her from the deadly grip of the abandoned complex, from the noose that almost tightened around her. Lena glanced to where the side mirror had just been and couldn't suppress a dry, ironic laugh. The rear-view mirrors were unnecessary now. To look back meant to peer into the abyss, while the goal lay ahead, and she wasn't going to stop until she reached out and touched it with her palm. Because, as long as you're alive, you haven't lost.